welcome back to my channel. If you are brand new here, my name is Kylie and I make content about being a young person living with narcolepsy. The main purpose of my channel is to show that you can still live a very fulfilling life even if you have a sleep disorder, to raise awareness about narcolepsy, and to share info and stories from other people who have narcolepsy. I also give you a glimpse into my experience being pregnant with narcolepsy, as well as the occasional travel vlog. If you don't know what narcolepsy is, have no fear. Check out my Narcolepsy 101 video where I break it down for you. Enough of all that intro stuff. The point of today's video is for me to finally share my narcoleptic story with all of you. Let's rewind to late summer, early fall of 2012. I was just graduating high school a few months before that, finally legal and free to do whatever I please. Since my family didn't really have money, there was no way they could have bought me a car. There was no point in me getting a license up until this point. So as soon as I turned 18, I went and got my driver's license. Eventually, I was gifted a hand-me-down Oldsmobile Alero that was in such bad condition that I literally had doorstops holding the back windows up. But it got me from point A to point B, so I was grateful. I was working my first job as a hostess at a cafe in my hometown, and I was in my first real-world relationship, and at the time we were living at his mom's house. Other than making peanuts at our restaurant jobs, we would spend time staying up late with friends, almost like a summer vacation that would never end. I remember being able to stay up late hanging out with friends, go to work the next day, go hang out with them again, and repeat. There was one particular evening in his mom's kitchen that I will never forget. Several of us were talking and somebody said something funny. And when I went to laugh, I had this sudden feeling of weakness, like I almost couldn't hold myself up. And I remember I even had to hold on to the kitchen counter that was to the side of me, and then it was gone. And I remember telling a few people there how weird that was because I had never felt that before. About a month or so goes by, and I forgot all about experiencing that until it happens again. This time I was at work because I remember telling my coworkers how weird I felt that day and how I had that feeling once before. Little did I know that that feeling that I had had twice in a matter of 2.5 months would eventually increase to about 30 plus times a day in the next 3 to 4 months' time. And it only increased in strength. For example, the first few times it only felt internal, but by the 3 or 4 months later, it felt like I could physically not stand up sometimes. Also during those 3 to 4 months, there were several other changes that started to occur. I went from being that girl who could stay up late hanging with friends every night and still go to work and get what I need to done, to being someone who would go to sleep early, wake up late, and would have to nap in between. It eventually got to the point where I could not sit down on a couch or sit in the passenger seat of a car for more than 2 to 3 minutes without falling asleep completely. I also started to gain weight rapidly. I am 5'7", and in high school I averaged about 115. I gained all the way up to about 140. In a very short period of time. Just for reference, at 7.5 months pregnant, I was like 147 pounds. And my average nowadays is usually 125. So you can only imagine like how that felt to gain that much weight that quickly. I remember going over to my brother's house, who I do not see very often, and him saying, "Wow, Kylie, you're fat." Leave it to your brother to keep you grounded, huh? At this point, I was now a server at the cafe that I worked at, and more often than not, I would work doubles. I remember talking to my coworkers and explaining how weird I started to feel, and they would suggest, oh, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, and it never was any of those things. My boyfriend and I's mom at the time tried everything we could think of. I started taking iron supplements, thinking maybe my iron is just low. I increased the amount of water that I drank to the point where I was peeing every half an hour. And we even stooped so low one time to try eating liver and onions. I still laugh when I think about that because I can see us sitting there taking the microscopic bite that we took, because she took it with me, and we both realized that's where we draw the line and my health is not worth it. And that was disgusting. Anyway, none of that helped. A few more months passed by, and at this point I had been to the ER 3 times out of desperation. The first time, they let me leave with no answer. At the conclusion of my second ER trip, they told me that I may be dehydrated, which I knew was not true since, like I said, I increased my water intake by like triple the amount. And by the third trip, they told me that I have vertigo. And I was so excited. Vertigo? Psh, that's nothing. Your equilibrium's off, you get your medication. I don't remember if it was antibiotics or what. How great is that? I found my answer. Now I can work on the solution. And it would go away, right? Wrong. After taking the medication, we realized I did not have vertigo. Looking back, I remember when I was explaining to them how I felt that weakness, I remember saying that I felt faint sometimes. And I think they took that as dizzy. And you know, when you have vertigo, your equilibrium's off. But I never said I was dizzy or that I was having trouble like balancing. I felt faint, like a marionette puppet that was being held up by strings, and then all of a sudden someone would just let go and I felt like I could just fall. At this point, I felt so hopeless. How could they not tell that something was wrong with me? Why are all the tests coming back perfectly when I know I feel awful all the time? Am I going to have to feel this way for the rest of my life? And lastly, I kept thinking about how everyone else my age who also just graduated high school was going off into their new lives, making their own choices, starting new careers, going to college, making decisions with money, and having all the freedoms that people of that age should have. And yet here I am, barely making it through each day. In case you were wondering, I wasn't going to a regular doctor at the time because I made peanuts working at the restaurant, and I couldn't afford health insurance or to pay for hefty doctor bills, which is why I ended up in the ER several times. However, it was pretty evident that by this point, something was about to change. I was getting worse and worse by the day. I was struggling so hard to get through work, and I was struggling outside of work in my personal life as well. I felt as if friends of ours were looking at me like I was just lazy or making excuses, and whether they meant to or not, I could feel the judgment. Because if you look at me, I look fine. I don't have spots. I'm not turning blue. Like, I look fine on the outside, but I did not feel fine on the inside at all. All of this started to plant a seed of depression inside of me. I didn't even want to go around anybody because I felt awful all the time. I also felt like nobody believed me, except for my mom, my boyfriend at the time, and his mom, because they were like the 3 people that were closest to me. And they watched me go from a charismatic individual to someone who was dull and could barely complete daily tasks. I was miserable because of how I felt. The weight gain made me look like I just let myself go. I couldn't afford to go get my hair done professionally, so I would box diet. And my bitterness about my situation started to rub off on everyone around me. Although the 3 of them believed me when I said something was wrong with me, and they would stick up for me if people would say hurtful things about me, all of this still affected every relationship I had with friends, neighbors, coworkers, etc. Because I was basically checked out of life at this point. I didn't care about anything that involved socializing, and I started to limit my driving to only work and back. It got to the point where when I would ride as a passenger, I would repeatedly fall asleep in the car. You know, you usually have conversations when you're in the car, and sometimes that's the time you have talks with people. And I would sit there and start to fall asleep, and then my head would fall and I'd nod, and that would wake me up, and then I'd be like, okay, I'm good. And then I would fall asleep. 30 seconds later, like it would happen repeatedly, and I was dreaming every time I would fall asleep for that few seconds. Eventually, it was suggested that I stop working and figure out what the heck is wrong with me. And the thought of that was kind of like, on one hand, great, sounds good, right? Go figure out your life. And on the other hand, I don't want to stop working. I don't want someone else to have to take care of me. I will take care of me. I am perfectly capable, or at least I should be. Well, I eventually just swallowed my pride and quit my job. And looking back, I am so happy that I did that. Since I no longer had a job, I then qualified for and obtained Medicaid, which kind of only added to my depression, because I'm not judging anyone, but me personally, being someone who's always been healthy and able-bodied, I don't have an excuse. Why am I living off the government? So it kind of added to my depression, like, wait, everyone's starting their lives right now, and I'm going backwards. What is happening? However, there was a small part of me that had a little glimmer of hope, because now I can go to a doctor. With my newfound Medicaid, I went to the primary care doctor who I went to when I was a preteen and younger than that. And at first I remember them sounding so positive and talking about, let's do process of elimination. We're gonna figure out what's not wrong with you to figure out what is wrong with you. And for the first time, I could see a light at the end of the tunnel. They started by having me do a test, and then I'd come back in a couple weeks and get the results. Then I'd go do another test in a couple weeks, come back for the results, and we kept repeating that process. It took me some time to realize that I was wasting my time, because in the moment as a patient, I thought we had to be getting close, right? Well, after about 3 months of trying their process of elimination tactic, my symptoms were still increasing by the day. There were eventually 3 occurrences that led to a breaking point, and I'm going to share those with you. The first occurrence is hallucination. I remember one night, we were still living at his mom's house, and he's sleeping in bed, black room, except for the light that I could see under the crack of the door from the hallway light. And all of a sudden, I'm dreaming about my dog. He's a small dachshund. Well, all of a sudden, I see my dog come in the room from the door, and he walks around the side of the bed, kind of jumped up on the side of the bed and put his paws up like, okay, pick me up. And I am freaking out, watching him walk around the bed, because he's dead. But I can see him as clearly as I can see this curtain. And I am literally watching him in slow-mo, and I am sitting up in bed, backing up and watching him like, holy crap, why can I see him right now? I start, wake up, wake up. And then when I look this way and I look back, he's gone. But I'm still sitting up exactly how I was in my dream. I was fully hallucinating that situation. And that made me realize, like, something's gotta give. The second occurrence is a sadder one, but important. I went over to my mom's to visit. My mom had known what was going on, but again, she didn't know what was wrong with me. None of us knew what was wrong with me. But as a mother, she's concerned and she's worried about me, and she's kind of heartbroken because she doesn't want to see me doing so bad. And I don't remember what it was. I was just giving her an update on the fact that they kept giving me tests and getting no results. And guess what? I'm healthy when it comes to everything else, but we still don't know what the heck is wrong with me. But I was standing in her doorway, started crying, and the minute I started to cry, I fell to the ground, like literally on my knees, couldn't pick myself up, which made me cry more. And I'm 8 months pregnant right now, so I'm a little easy to cry, so I'm gonna try not to while I'm telling you this story. But I remember that like it was yesterday. And I'm laying on the floor, and my mom's just looking at me, like she kind of tried to help me up, but she could kind of tell, like, you gotta wait it out. It was a very emotional moment. That was the second occurrence where I was like, I cannot live like this. And the final occurrence, the pinnacle of the occurrences, which led to a breaking point, is that one day I went from his mom's house to my mom's to go visit her again. And in order to get there, you would have to go on this very busy road, 3 lanes both ways, busy all the time. People drive crazy. That's just how it is. If you're from the town I live in, you know exactly which road I'm talking about. I then get into her neighborhood and I'm driving slow, of course, making my little turns, and she lived around a curve. I'm about to take the turn and then turn into her driveway when all of a sudden I wake up. Yeah, I wake up. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up. I hear this loud crash, which was me utterly annihilating their neighbor's mailbox. And they lived in one of those neighborhoods where it wasn't just a pole and a box. It was like the whole sign with your name on it, lamppost, has the little newspaper bin underneath. Like, it was the whole 9 yards for a mailbox. And I destroyed it. And because there was such a deep ditch, I kind of went over the driveway sideways, not like I was driving into the driveway, but my car went like this, to where if this is the ditch under here, my tires went clink. And like I said, I was driving very slow, so it wasn't like I just flew into the house or anything. As soon as my tires went into that ditch, my car stopped. So all of a sudden I wake up to that and I just start crying because and at the same time, my mom and my stepdad come running out of their house because they heard the loud noise. They didn't even know it was me that made that noise until they got out there. I got out of the car. I don't even think I put it in park. My stepdad, who is the best, jumped in and took care of the car. And this is the moment where I reached my max when it came to that primary doctor's office. Right there in that neighbor's driveway, I called my primary care physician. I remember this moment like it literally happened this morning. I still feel the fury and the passion behind this moment. Basically what I said to them was, your process of elimination is not working for me. We're not doing this fast enough. My symptoms are getting worse by the day. I just crashed my car when falling asleep into a neighbor's mailbox, and I am not stepping foot into your office again. And I told them I need a referral to a specialist. I don't care if you give me 16 referrals to 16 different doctors that are specialists in something. I am not going back to your office. And what did they say? They said, okay. And they complied. A couple weeks later, I found myself in a neurologist's office, giving every detail of my life for the last year and a half to a male nurse who would soon go give the info to a doctor before he comes in the room to chat with me. While waiting for the doctor, the male nurse comes back and he says, I forgot to ask you, do you ever have vivid dreams? And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I left that part out. I have the most vivid dreams, to the point where I could paint you what I saw in color. I could tell you how it smelled. Like, the dreams are off the charts. He said, okay, be right back. When the doctor comes in, he says, I believe you may have narcolepsy. I had no idea what that was, but I listened to everything he said intently. And then he informed me that he would have to do a sleep study in order to know for sure. A week later, around 7 or 8 at night, I was coming to his doctor's office to a portion of the building that was the dedicated sleep center. They hooked wires up all over my face and head, and I think there were a few near my heart. I Googled, and I believe on average it's like 22 wires. What this is for the polysomnogram, which is the sleep study. Then they told me to go to sleep. They had a microphone right next to the bed to where they could hear if I made any noises, and they had a camera in the corner of the room to watch any movements that I made. I remember that if I had to use the restroom, I would have to wave to the camera to the person who's out there monitoring it in order for them to unhook me from the wall so I could go to the restroom. The next morning they would start what I call the nap tests. It's technically called the multiple sleep latency tests, otherwise known as MSLT. And this was the test that would for sure determine if I had narcolepsy or not. They woke me up, turned on all the lights, turned on the TV, gave me breakfast, and I stayed awake for an hour. At the end of that hour, they came in, they turned off the TV, turned off the lights, and told me to go to sleep. Then, after 20 minutes, they turned on the lights, woke me up, turned on the TV, and told me to stay awake for an hour. And we did this 5 times. By the end of it, it was about noon, and then they gave me lunch. And I remember it being one of those little salad kit bowls that was like the chicken Caesar, you know, has everything in there that you need. And I'm not gonna lie, at that point in my life, I was not a huge salad eater. And I remember being like, this is disgusting. The little things you remember, right? And then I was picked up to go home. When I went back for my results, I remember them explaining to me that the average person would go into REM sleep no sooner than 8 minutes out of those 20 minutes for each of those naps. And for me, I went into REM sleep in less than 2 minutes every time. So I was described as the perfect narcoleptic because I had like every symptom and my test was like, check, check, check. Although I had no idea what narcolepsy meant for my future, I knew that finding out what was wrong with me meant there was a possibility of a solution. Together, my doctor and I figured out a treatment plan that would work for me, and I would soon find out that this was going to change my life. When you start on a treatment like this, you have to have a nurse calling you. At first, I believe it's like every day for a week, and then it's like every 2 weeks, and then it's like once a month for a certain amount of time, and then eventually you don't have to check in as much. I remember the morning after the first night that I took my treatment. I stayed at my mom's house the first night. I remember waking up, and I was in her living room when the nurse called me. And she's asking me all the normal questions, and I said verbatim, I feel like I slept for the first time in 2 years. Whew. Still makes me a little emotional because I was so hopeless for such a long time and thought that this gray cloud above me was just never gonna go away and we would never figure out what's wrong with me. And I finally felt like somewhat normal. For the first time in over a year, I felt hopeful for my future again. In the next year or two to follow, I learned how to manage my life with my treatment and had to deal with some negative side effects from that. For instance, I went from feeling like 30% quality of life to about 85-90% quality of life, which is great, but I still had to deal with the times that I felt that miserable exhaustion as if I was at 30%. It just wasn't 24 hours a day anymore. It was several times a day for short periods of time. As we know, nothing is perfect, but I was so grateful for the improved quality of my life so far. Two of the big negatives for me when it came to my treatment was that I had to live a very structured life and a very scheduled life. And I didn't like that. I've always said I had like a gypsy soul and I just like to go with the flow, whatever feels right, stay up late, you know, figure it out as you go. But when you're on a treatment like this, you have to have structure in your life in order to manage it. The second thing, which was worse, was that my treatment prevented me from waking up in the middle of the night in order to go use the restroom. So I will let you use your imagination to ponder how it was to be 20, 21 years old and dealing with that. It was something that was god-awful, embarrassing, annoying, and on one hand you're like, okay, well, I'm just not going to take this treatment. Well, that's not an option when you literally cannot have a job and cannot drive without the treatment that gives you a good enough quality of life to do those basic tasks. You gotta kind of weigh your options here, and I dealt with it. Luckily, by the time I was 22, I had found a solution to that negative side effect, and that became a thing of the past. Overall, I will summarize the last 8 years of having my diagnosis and my treatment like this. It's easy to take life for granted because you've been blessed with good health. And I don't mean to sound corny, it took having all of that flash before my eyes and being what I call the health trenches, so to speak, to realize how blessed I am. For the first 18 years of my life, I was at 100 when it came to quality of life and health. I could do anything anyone else could do. Whatever I set my mind to, I was capable of doing. And then that was taken away. And I went down to about 30%. Now I'm back around 85%. Although I will always struggle my entire life in one way or another, and sometimes 3 ways at once, There's always someone that has it worse than I do, and I do not take that for granted. I'm strong enough to get through it, and I will always still live a fulfilling life despite my sleep disorder. I will say that I think it has helped me in other aspects of my life. Yes, there are struggles you go through regularly when you have narcolepsy, and that's not just to say how you feel in your health, because as I mentioned, the treatment is not perfect, but it's also dealing with doctors, pharmacies, health insurance companies in order to get your treatment that can really cause you to have depression even after you have a diagnosis. All that to say, I still try to look for the positive. There is a silver lining in everything, and I think that helped me a lot in life, to see things through the 16 different shades of gray instead of just black and white. So if you take anything away from this video, whether you have narcolepsy or not, I hope that it is, even if you're going through the toughest season of your life that you think will never end, keep pushing through. You're worth it. You're strong enough to deal with it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been presented in your life. If you'd like more information on narcolepsy, the symptoms, treatment, how to diagnose it, or how my pregnancy has been as a person with narcolepsy, I do have videos on all those subjects. If you or a loved one has narcolepsy and would like to share any story regarding your experiences, I would love to hear it and read it anonymously on my channel. I do have a series called Your Narcoleptic Stories. Just send me an email. It is in the description below. Also in the description are resources for if you are feeling depressed or hopeless, if you have narcolepsy and you need to speak with somebody, and for people in the narcoleptic community if you just want to ask questions. If you enjoyed my video, I would appreciate it if you would consider subscribing to my channel and liking this video. With that being said, I appreciate you so much for taking the time to watch my video and hear about my narcoleptic story, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. See you in the next video.